Is it better to focus on just one weapon, or should you train a lot of different weapons? Is it better to be a specialist or a generalist? Today, we find out.
And you shall find me a grave man.
You ready, gentlemen?
Let me just start off with a little caveat on specialist and generalist, because this isn't actually one thing or two different things. It's a spectrum of things. So if you're a specialist, you could say, I'm training just one weapon. But you could also be very focused on competing. And you could be focused on one competitive rule set. And you could even have a personal game and a set of techniques that you're really, really focused on. Or you could be a generalist and you try to understand the complete society. Maybe you're sewing your own clothes. Maybe you're trying to understand what it meant to be a soldier. And soldiering, of course, means a lot more than just fighting with swords. So, that goes even farther, almost towards reenactment or living history, if you will. So those are it's sort of a spectrum in between. My main focus today will be on whether you should train just one weapon or if you should train several different weapons, and why I think the way that I do about that. So first of all, the difference between the generalist and the specialist, they're different because they have different goals. I mean, if you're focused on winning a tournament, that's a different goal if you're trying to understand the complete society. But I think a lot of people are making the mistake that thinking that the tournament fighter is a better fighter in general. And I mean, yeah, they sort of probably are. But that does not mean that if you take that fighter and you'd throw them into a medieval battlefield that they'd survive or do better because of that. I mean, maybe they would because they're better physically equipped or whatever, but there's far more to the context and surviving in that setting than there is to winning a tournament at, for example, Swordfish or wherever you're fighting your tournaments. So these are two different goals, and they're not easily to be comparable. They're not really comparable at all, really. So having views on who's the better fighter, etc., it's pretty ridiculous, to be honest. You get good at what you train at, and that's the thing. You can't really compare people who have different goals. It's not easily done. You shouldn't really do it. But when it comes to training one weapon or several weapons, there are also other things to consider. So, for example, if you're focusing on 15th or 16th century martial arts in Germany, and you're just focusing on one weapon, it's sort of anachronistic in a way, because most of those sources are focused on various weapons. You're not just training longsword, they also contain wrestling, dagger, sword and buckler, armored fencing or fighting, and on horseback, and so on. So most of those sources, or a lot of those sources, are much broader in their scope. Whereas later sources, if you're looking, for example, at 18th century foil, they're very, very specific. And one of the reasons for that is that the weapon in itself, the foil, is a very specific weapon. You could possibly cut a little bit with it, but not like you could with a longsword. And it's also focused on civilian defense to a large degree, or dueling setting, which is different. It's no longer a warrior class in that regard. Those things have changed between these two time periods. So, it's a more specialized weapon, and it also then benefits you to maybe focusing on that and specializing in that to some extent. Now, for a person focusing on the 16th century sources and doing longsword, for example, the format of the longsword in itself, where you're cutting, you're thrusting, you're slicing, you got wrestling, and all of that, means that sort of changes the game. And there are clearly benefits for a longsword fencer who wants to be good at longsword, who's specialized on that, to at least cross-train a little bit with rapier. and take the thrusting game to a different level. And a lot of longswordists have seen how that focus has changed and increased their skills within longsword just by training rapier. And the same, of course, is true if you're training some ringen or wrestling, and you can then be pretty sure that it's going to help you in your ringen am Schwert or wrestling with a sword in your longsword fencing as well. So cross-training, if you're focused on that period, is sort of natural if you want to increase your skills. But is it true if you're a beginner as well? If you're a beginner, you're neither a specialist nor a generalist, of course. You're a beginner, so you're starting off your journey towards martial art. But should you focus on just training one thing, or should you do a lot of different weapons to get better? Well, as always, it sort of depends. You get good at what you train at, but you also get good depending on how much you train. So if you're, for example, in a club that offers different classes for different weapons on different days, and you have all the time in the world and want to train every night, well, I say go for it. Train as much as you can, and you'll then naturally train different weapons. But you're training every day, so you're going to progress really, really quickly. If your time is limited, however, and you don't have the time to go to different classes, maybe you can only go to 1 or 2 classes a week, and your option is then to train one thing and follow that curriculum, or going to different weapons and each day and not following one specific curriculum, maybe not even with the same teacher, but learning different things. Then I would strongly suggest that you focus on one thing. Now, those things that you learn in training one thing is going to transfer if you then want to move on. But if you want to increase your skills quicker, it's better to not sort of mix things up too much too early. So maybe you should at least give it a year of training one weapon before you start looking at other sources as well. But for a lot of people, this is going to come down to practicalities. Maybe the training changes dates and you can't fit it into your schedule anymore. Maybe you get an injury, so you want to shift to fencing a one-handed weapon, for example, if you hurt your hand. So a lot of these things usually play into why you're training what you're training. So let me just finish off with a few personal thoughts about being a generalist or a specialist. I think in historical fencing, I've seen at least an increase in individuals who are focusing on a set of techniques rather than being more generalist. That is something I'm fairly negative towards. I think it risks going away from the sources if we're looking at the 15th and 16th century martial arts specifically. Not so much, of course, when it comes to foil, but having this tournament format where we're getting rules that are becoming standardized, and you're getting fencers who are fencing according to those rules, we risk sort of veering off from the historical part of historical European martial arts. On a positive note, however, people like Dennis Ljungqvist, who fights in various weapon formats and according to almost any rule, you can see that his skills are definitely transferable between different weapon sets and different rule sets. So I think that that's a very positive thing. So it's not clear-cut, but I would like to warn against too much of a competitive focus and too much of a focus on one specific thing, and forgetting completely about the culture and all of those aspects, the sources and the historical setting of these martial arts. I think that we must bring them with us, or we will lose the H in the historical European martial arts. It will just become something new. That's all fine by me if people want to do that, but it's not what my focus is. Thank you for listening. I hope that you will consider joining our Facebook discussions over at our Facebook page, or in HEMA Council on Facebook as well, or write in the comments below here on YouTube. Thank you for listening. Did you like that video? I hope that you did, and if so, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. We also have a Patreon where you can support us and a Facebook page where you can take part in discussions. That's it for now. Take care and fence well.